Let's talk about the drama behind Meghan Markle's wedding tiara. Meghan Markle wore Queen Mary's bandeau tiara on her wedding day, and this detachable diamond brooch was the tiara's main focal point. Traditionally, the tiara featured a detachable sapphire brooch, but Meghan switched it to a diamond. But did you know that this tiara actually wasn't Meghan's first choice? Meghan actually wanted to wear this tiara that I won't butcher the name, which Princess Eugenie actually ended up wearing to her wedding. But Queen Elizabeth told Meghan it wouldn't be appropriate to wear, and that's because the tiara might have had Russian origin and a shaky past, and if it was linked to scandal, Queen Elizabeth thought it might give the pair bad luck on their wedding day. But which royal jewelry look should I talk about next?
You've probably heard all the chatter about whether Meghan Markle could lose her Duchess of Sussex title, but there's a twist almost nobody sees coming. Even if the palace did ever strip Meghan and Harry of Sussex, Meghan would still keep a royal title, one that would actually leave Americans and plenty of Brits scratching their heads. According to Majesty Magazine's Ingrid Seward, Meghan would become Princess Henry. Royal tradition dictates wives of princes are styled with their husband's first name. So, behind all the Sussex drama, Meghan's royal connection is set for life, just not how you might expect. It's a bit like Kate. Technically, she could be called Princess William, but chooses her more familiar title instead. Most modern royals skip the tradition, but the option's always there. Now, you might remember the fuss over Meghan reportedly using her HRH style on a note to a friend this year. Despite agreeing not to use it officially after stepping back, her team say it was just a personal gesture, but some royal fans were not having it. The bottom line, stripping titles isn't as straightforward or satisfying as some might hope. Pull one away, another pops up. Would calling Meghan Princess Henry make things less confusing or more? Drop your thoughts below.
Welcome back everyone to the channel. If you enjoyed deep discussions surrounding royal controversies, celebrity culture, media manipulation, and the stories behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and join the conversation down below. Today we are diving into one of the most divisive public figures of the modern royal era, Meghan Markle, and the ongoing criticism surrounding her relationship with privilege, wealth, status, and what many critics describe as a constant pattern of complaints despite extraordinary opportunities. Now, before we begin, it's important to acknowledge something. Conversations surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are incredibly polarizing. There are passionate defenders on one side and equally passionate critics on the other. Some people see Meghan as a woman unfairly targeted by the British press and trapped inside an outdated institution. Others see her as someone who entered the royal family, benefited massively from it, and then spent years publicly criticizing the very system that elevated her profile to global fame. Regardless of where people stand, one thing is undeniable. Few modern royal figures have sparked as much debate, media attention, and public fascination as Meghan Markle. And honestly, that alone says a lot, because years after stepping away from royal duties, Meghan and Harry remain headline magnets. Every interview, every podcast appearance, every documentary, every speech, every public complaint, every business deal, all of it still dominates global conversations. The reason for that is simple. Their story touches on several themes that fascinate modern audiences: power, privilege, celebrity culture, victimhood narratives, race, family conflict, money, media manipulation, and the clash between tradition and modern branding. But today, we are focusing specifically on the criticism Meghan Markle receives from people who believe she has consistently portrayed herself as a victim, while enjoying levels of privilege that most people could never even imagine. Let's begin at the moment everything changed. When Meghan Markle became engaged to Prince Harry, the media reaction was explosive. At first, she was embraced almost universally by the British press and much of the international media. Headlines celebrated her as a fresh, modern addition to the monarchy. Commentators praised the idea of an American actress joining the royal family. Some even framed the relationship as evidence that the monarchy was evolving into a more diverse and globally relatable institution. The excitement surrounding the wedding was enormous. Millions of people across the world tuned in to watch the ceremony at Windsor Castle. The event was presented as a historic cultural moment, glamorous, emotional, modern, and symbolic. And make no mistake, it was spectacular in every sense of the word. The dress, the flowers, the music, the celebrity guests, the media coverage, the security operation, the reception, the carriage procession. Every element was grand on a scale that ordinary people simply cannot comprehend. But here is where critics begin raising questions. Because despite receiving this extraordinary royal wedding funded through royal resources and taxpayer-supported infrastructure, Meghan later referred to the wedding as a spectacle. That single word became a major flashpoint for critics. To many people, it sounded dismissive and ungrateful. Critics argued that if Meghan truly disliked the public nature of the event, she could have requested something smaller and more private. After all, Prince Harry was never directly in line for the throne the way William was. A more modest ceremony would have been entirely possible. Instead, critics argue, the grandeur was accepted fully at the time, only for the narrative to later shift into one of discomfort and victimhood. And this is where one of the biggest complaints against Meghan Markle begins to emerge, the perception that she consistently benefits from enormous privilege while later reframing those experiences negatively once public sympathy becomes strategically useful. Now, whether that criticism is fair or unfair depends entirely on your perspective, but it is undeniably one of the core reasons public opinion became so sharply divided. Because for many ordinary people, especially during periods of economic hardship, hearing complaints from individuals living inside palaces and attending multi-million-pound weddings creates a disconnect that is difficult to overcome. Most people struggle with bills, rent, mortgages, fuel prices, food costs, and job insecurity. So when public figures with extraordinary wealth and opportunity continue emphasizing how difficult their lives are, some audiences naturally become skeptical, and Frogmore Cottage became another major example of this tension. Frogmore Cottage was intended to be Harry and Meghan's UK residence after their marriage. The property underwent significant renovations, reportedly costing around £2.4 million. Public controversy exploded once taxpayers learned how much money had been spent upgrading the home. Critics questioned why ordinary citizens should finance luxury renovations for royals already living privileged lives. Later, Harry and Meghan stated publicly that they repaid the renovation costs. But even then, debate continued over exactly how much was repaid, who covered various expenses, and what role Prince Charles may have played financially behind the scenes. Reports and speculation surrounding the funding only fueled further public resentment. Then came reports and comments suggesting Frogmore somehow wasn't satisfactory or ideal, and for critics this became symbolic of something larger. The idea that no amount of luxury or support would ever truly satisfy Meghan Markle. To understand why this perception became so widespread, you have to look beyond just the facts themselves and focus on public psychology. Most people judge public figures emotionally rather than analytically. And emotionally, many observers saw a pattern developing. An extravagant royal wedding, complaints later followed. A globally admired royal platform, complaints followed. A renovated royal residence, complaints followed. Royal titles and global fame, complaints followed. Financial independence opportunities through massive media deals, complaints still followed. And eventually, many critics reached the conclusion that dissatisfaction itself had become central to Meghan and Harry's public identity. Now, supporters would strongly reject that interpretation. They argue that Meghan faced relentless media hostility, racism, invasive tabloid coverage, and institutional coldness behind palace walls. They point to specific headlines, social media abuse, and comparisons with how Kate Middleton was treated by sections of the press. And to be fair, some tabloid coverage absolutely crossed the line. There were articles and commentaries that became deeply personal, invasive, and at times ugly. Even people critical of Meghan often acknowledge that portions of the British tabloid ecosystem can be ruthless and toxic. But critics counter with a different argument entirely. They say that royal life has always involved scrutiny, pressure, and media intrusion. Princess Diana experienced it, Kate Middleton experienced it, Prince Charles experienced it, Camilla experienced it. The monarchy has never been a comfortable existence, insulated from criticism. The difference, critics argue, is how individuals respond to that pressure. The traditional royal model emphasizes restraint, silence, and endurance. Meghan and Harry instead chose public confrontation. Interviews were given, documentaries were produced, accusations were made publicly, personal family disputes became global entertainment content, and to critics this represented a dramatic break from royal norms. Perhaps no moment crystallized this more than the Oprah interview. That interview changed everything. It transformed private royal tensions into an international media spectacle. Allegations were discussed on one of the world's biggest television platforms. Claims involving racism, mental health struggles, palace neglect, and family conflict dominated global headlines for weeks. For supporters, the interview represented bravery and truth-telling. For critics, it represented betrayal. And the reason reactions became so emotional is because monarchy itself is emotional. People project meaning onto the institution. Some see it as stability and tradition, others see it as outdated privilege. Meghan and Harry's departure became symbolic far beyond their individual personalities. To critics especially, the Oprah interview reinforced a growing frustration with what they perceived as selective victimhood. They questioned how two people living in multi-million-dollar mansions, signing massive Netflix and Spotify deals, and enjoying global celebrity influence could simultaneously present themselves primarily as oppressed victims. And this taps into a much broader cultural issue. Modern celebrity culture increasingly rewards victim narratives. Public sympathy has become incredibly valuable. Emotional storytelling generates attention, engagement, loyalty, and media coverage. In many ways, vulnerability itself has become a form of branding. Critics argue that Meghan and Harry mastered this formula perfectly. They position themselves as rebels against a cruel institution while still benefiting enormously from the fame and royal relevance attached to that institution. That contradiction remains central to why public opinion stays so divided even years later. Another major source of criticism involves Meghan's public image as a humanitarian and activist. Critics often argue that there is a disconnect between the compassionate image presented publicly and the aggressive media battles surrounding the Sussex brand. Because while Meghan speaks frequently about kindness, compassion, mental health, and positive change, critics point out that many public projects connected to the Sussexes revolve around criticism, grievances, or personal conflicts. The Netflix documentary focused heavily on victimization narratives. Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, intensified family tensions dramatically. Repeated media appearances revisited royal conflicts again and again. For critics, this constant revisiting of grievances began feeling exhausting and repetitive, and over time the public mood shifted. Early sympathy gradually gave way to fatigue among certain audiences. People began asking, if the goal was privacy and peace, why continue producing content centered around royal drama? This question became particularly important after Harry and Meghan relocated to California. They stepped away from royal duties in pursuit of independence and privacy. Yet, paradoxically, their global relevance remained almost entirely tied to discussing the royal family. Critics argue that this reveals a deeper contradiction at the center of the Sussex brand. Without royal conflict, much of the public attention disappears. That's why every interview, memoir, documentary, or public appearance continues circling back to the monarchy in some way. And this creates another fascinating dynamic. Meghan and Harry simultaneously criticize the institution, while relying on public fascination with that institution for commercial relevance. Again, supporters reject this interpretation completely. They argue Harry has every right to discuss trauma, institutional dysfunction, and family conflict. They believe the couple deserves the opportunity to tell their side of the story after years of negative press. But critics see endless monetization of private grievances. And whether fair or not, that perception has become deeply embedded among large sections of the public. Another major criticism directed at Meghan Markle concerns authenticity. Critics frequently accuse her of carefully curating different public identities depending on audience and opportunity. They argue her public persona often feels strategically constructed rather than genuine. One moment she presents herself as a humanitarian activist, another moment as a struggling victim, another as a Hollywood entrepreneur, another as a feminist icon, another as a wellness influencer. Critics say these shifting identities sometimes feel inconsistent and opportunistic rather than authentic. Now, obviously, public figures evolve. Everyone adapts across different environments. But Meghan's critics argue the transformations often appear overly polished and heavily brand-managed. This is particularly evident in discussions around her pre-royal career. Before marrying Prince Harry, Meghan Markle was known primarily for her role on the television show Suits. She had moderate celebrity status, but nowhere near the level of global fame she later achieved. Critics argue that joining the royal family elevated her into a level of influence and visibility she likely never would have achieved independently through Hollywood alone. And because of that, some people believe there is profound irony in later condemning the very institution that created her global platform. Again, supporters respond by saying personal suffering cannot simply be dismissed because someone gained status or wealth. They argue privilege does not eliminate emotional pain or institutional mistreatment. And that is true. Wealth and fame do not automatically create happiness. But critics respond differently. They argue Meghan consistently emphasizes hardship while minimizing the extraordinary opportunities and support she received. This perceived imbalance is what fuels so much resentment, because people generally admire resilience when paired with gratitude. What many critics feel they see instead is grievance without acknowledgement of privilege, and perception matters enormously in public life. Now let's discuss another important aspect of this controversy, Prince Harry himself. Much of the criticism directed at Meghan also involves beliefs that Harry fundamentally changed after the relationship began. Critics argue he became increasingly hostile toward his family, disconnected from longtime friends, and consumed by resentment and grievance. Some royal commentators even suggest Meghan accelerated existing frustrations Harry already carried internally for years. Of course, others believe Harry finally found someone who encouraged him to challenge a restrictive institution rather than simply endure it silently. But regardless of perspective, the transformation in Harry's public image has been dramatic. For years, he was widely viewed as the fun prince, relatable and charismatic. His military service, charity work, and informal personality made him one of the monarchy's most popular figures. Today, public opinion is far more divided, and critics argue Meghan's influence played a significant role in that transformation. Whether fair or unfair, many people perceive Harry as increasingly bitter, isolated, and angry compared to his earlier public image. Then there's the issue of family conflict. Royal family disputes have always existed behind palace walls, but traditionally those tensions remained private. Harry and Meghan changed that completely. Private disagreements became public narratives. Conversations, grievances, and accusations entered interviews, books, documentaries, and media discussions. Critics view this as deeply destructive. They argue that families, even dysfunctional ones, require boundaries and discretion. Publicly airing conflicts for global audiences feels deeply uncomfortable to many people. And this is especially true when elderly family members are involved. The period surrounding Queen Elizabeth II's final years intensified criticism further because many observers felt ongoing. Sussex-related drama added unnecessary stress during a sensitive time for the monarchy. Critics often contrast the Queen's lifelong commitment to duty and restraint with the increasingly public grievances coming from California. This contrast became emotionally powerful for many royal supporters. The Queen symbolized stability, composure, and service across decades, Harry and Meghan symbolized disruption, confrontation, and emotional exposure. That symbolic clash shaped public perceptions heavily, and then came Prince Harry's memoir, Spare. The book generated enormous attention globally. It included deeply personal stories, family disputes, military experiences, frustrations with the press, and intimate details about royal relationships. Supporters praised Harry's honesty and vulnerability. Critics saw something else entirely. They saw a prince publicly humiliating his family for profit and publicity. Stories about physical altercations with Prince William, tensions with Camilla, arguments within the family, and private moments inside palace life dominated headlines worldwide. For critics, it felt excessive, and importantly, every new revelation reinforced an already growing perception that the Sussexes could never move beyond grievance narratives. This is where broader cultural exhaustion began setting in among some audiences. At first, people were curious, then sympathetic, then divided. Eventually, many became tired. Because no matter the platform, Netflix, Oprah, memoirs, interviews, podcasts, the themes often return to the same central narrative: pain, betrayal, victimhood, mistreatment, and dissatisfaction. Critics argue that eventually public patience wears thin when negativity becomes repetitive, especially when those telling the story continue living extraordinarily privileged lives. And this brings us back to the central criticism in today's discussion: entitlement. Critics argue Meghan Markle embodies a modern form of celebrity entitlement where extraordinary privilege is normalized while emotional dissatisfaction remains constant. In other words, the privileges become invisible while the grievances remain endlessly highlighted. This perception explains why certain audiences react so strongly against her public image. It's not simply about disliking Meghan personally. For many people, she represents something broader about modern culture itself, a culture where fame increasingly revolves around personal victim narratives, a culture where celebrities lecture ordinary people about morality while living vastly privileged lives, a culture where gratitude sometimes appears absent even amid enormous success. And because Meghan Markle became one of the world's most visible celebrity figures, she naturally became a lightning rod for these frustrations. Now, another important factor here is media polarization. Meghan Markle coverage often reflects ideological divisions more than objective analysis. Different media ecosystems portray her in radically different ways. Some outlets depict her as courageous, modern, intelligent, and unfairly persecuted. Others portray her as manipulative, narcissistic, calculating, and endlessly dissatisfied. The truth likely exists somewhere more complicated in the middle. But modern media rarely rewards nuance. Outrage generates clicks, conflict generates engagement, and Meghan versus the monarchy became one of the most profitable media storylines in recent years. This created an environment where every gesture, interview, outfit, speech, and appearance became heavily scrutinized, and that level of scrutiny inevitably intensifies polarization further. Another issue critics raise involves the contradiction between anti-royal rhetoric and continued royal branding. Even after stepping away from royal duties, Harry and Meghan continue benefiting from royal titles, royal associations, and royal fascination. Their commercial value is deeply connected to the monarchy. Without those royal connections, the media interest would likely decrease dramatically. Critics argue you cannot simultaneously condemn an institution while relying heavily on the prestige and fascination tied to that institution. Supporters respond that Harry was born into royalty and cannot erase his identity simply because he criticized the system. Again, both perspectives contain elements of truth, but politically and culturally, the contradiction remains highly visible. Then there is the issue of celebrity activism. Meghan Markle frequently speaks about social causes, women's empowerment, mental health, and compassion. But critics often argue that celebrity activism can feel disconnected from ordinary reality. When multimillionaires lecture struggling working-class audiences about morality or social responsibility, skepticism naturally emerges. And this skepticism becomes even stronger when public messaging appears inconsistent with personal behavior. For example, critics point to private jet usage alongside climate activism discussions or public calls for privacy while participating in highly publicized media projects. These contradictions become easy targets for critics. And once a public figure develops a reputation for inconsistency, every future action gets interpreted through that lens. That is exactly what happened with Meghan Markle. Over time, even neutral actions became controversial because audiences had already formed strong emotional opinions. Now let's discuss one of the most emotionally charged aspects of this entire debate: gratitude. At its core, much criticism toward Meghan revolves around perceived lack of gratitude. People generally admire individuals who acknowledge opportunities and support they've received. Critics feel Meghan rarely emphasizes appreciation for the extraordinary life she entered through marriage into the royal family. Instead, they feel the narrative remains overwhelmingly focused on suffering and dissatisfaction. Whether that perception is fair or unfair, it explains the emotional intensity behind much public backlash. Because culturally, gratitude matters enormously, especially when enormous privilege is involved. To many critics, Meghan Markle appears to represent the opposite of gratitude. Someone who received wealth, status, influence, and global visibility, yet still presents herself primarily through grievances. Again, supporters would strongly dispute that characterization. But public perception often matters more than nuance in celebrity culture, and public perception surrounding Meghan remains deeply divided. At the same time, it's important to recognize that online criticism of Meghan sometimes becomes excessive and toxic. Not every critic behaves responsibly. Some commentary crosses lines into cruelty, obsession, or harassment. Healthy criticism is one thing, personal hatred is another, and this is important because discussions around public figures should remain grounded rather than dehumanizing. Even highly privileged celebrities are still human beings navigating extraordinary pressure and scrutiny. But equally, public figures who build careers around visibility and activism cannot reasonably expect immunity from criticism. That tension defines modern celebrity culture. Visibility creates opportunity, but also scrutiny. And few public figures understand that dynamic more than Meghan Markle. Another fascinating dimension of this saga is generational change. Older audiences often sympathize more strongly with traditional monarchy values like duty, restraint, and discretion. Younger audiences may sympathize more with emotional openness, mental health advocacy, and personal freedom. This generational divide partly explains why opinions about Meghan vary so dramatically across demographics. For some people, speaking openly about pain represents courage. For others, constant public disclosure feels self-indulgent and attention-seeking. These are fundamentally different cultural values colliding in real time. And Meghan Markle became one of the defining symbols of that cultural clash. Then there is the Hollywood factor. Critics frequently argue Meghan approached royal life through a celebrity mindset rather than a service mindset. The monarchy traditionally operates through hierarchy, protocol, symbolism, and institutional continuity. Hollywood operates through branding, visibility, emotional storytelling, and personal narrative control. These systems are fundamentally different. Some critics believe Meghan underestimated how incompatible those worlds could become. Others believe the monarchy itself failed to adapt to modern media realities. Again, there are reasonable arguments on both sides, but the collision between Hollywood celebrity culture and royal institutional culture produced enormous tension from the beginning, and once conflict emerged, it escalated rapidly because both sides operated according to completely different expectations. Critics argue Meghan wanted celebrity freedom combined with royal prestige. The institution expected duty combined with restraint. That mismatch may have made conflict inevitable. Now here's another important point rarely discussed carefully enough: public resentment toward privilege itself. Modern society contains growing frustration toward elites generally. Economic inequality, housing crises, inflation, political distrust, and social instability have created enormous resentment toward wealthy public figures. Against that backdrop, wealthy celebrities complaining publicly about their struggles can easily trigger backlash. That doesn't mean emotional pain isn't real, but perception matters politically and culturally, and many ordinary people simply struggle to emotionally connect with multimillionaires discussing oppression while living in luxury estates with massive media contracts. This disconnect is central to understanding criticism surrounding Meghan Markle. Because the issue isn't just Meghan herself, she symbolizes broader frustrations about privilege, celebrity culture, and elite victimhood narratives. And because she became globally famous through one of the world's oldest institutions, every controversy surrounding her became magnified enormously. Another reason this story continues dominating headlines is because it remains unresolved emotionally. There has been no real reconciliation, no clear closure. The tension between Harry, Meghan, and the royal family still feels unfinished, and unfinished stories maintain public attention far longer than resolved ones. People remain fascinated because they continue wondering what happens next. Will reconciliation ever occur? Will Harry regret leaving royal life? Will Meghan reinvent her public image successfully? Will public opinion soften over time, or will criticism continue indefinitely? These unanswered questions keep the saga alive, and media companies know that perfectly well. That's why royal coverage continues generating enormous engagement globally. Now, stepping back from personalities for a moment, there's also a deeper philosophical question here. What does society expect from privileged individuals? Do wealth and status create obligations toward gratitude and restraint? Or does emotional suffering remain equally valid regardless of privilege? There's no simple answer. But Meghan Markle sits directly at the center of that debate. Supporters emphasize emotional truth and institutional injustice. Critics emphasize privilege and perceived ingratitude. And because both sides focus on entirely different moral priorities, conversations rarely reach agreement. Instead, the debate continues endlessly. Now let's talk about image rehabilitation. In recent years, there have been visible attempts to shift Meghan's public image away from royal conflict toward lifestyle branding, entrepreneurship, and curated public appearances. This reflects an important reality about celebrity culture. Narratives can evolve. Public opinion is not permanently fixed. But rebuilding trust with skeptical audiences takes time, consistency, and authenticity. Critics argue that repeated contradictions have damaged Meghan's credibility permanently among certain demographics. Supporters argue she remains unfairly targeted no matter what she does. Again, polarization defines everything surrounding her public identity, and perhaps that's why this story remains so endlessly fascinating. Because it's no longer just about two individuals inside a family dispute. It has become symbolic of much larger tensions shaping modern culture itself. Tradition versus modernity, institution versus individuality, privacy versus publicity, duty versus personal fulfillment, privilege versus victimhood, authenticity versus branding, restraint versus emotional openness. All these cultural tensions collide within the Meghan and Harry story. That's why public reactions become so emotional. People aren't just reacting to Meghan Markle, they're reacting to what she represents symbolically within broader cultural debates. And as long as those cultural debates continue, fascination with this story will continue too. At the end of the day, every listener will reach their own conclusions. Some will always believe Meghan Markle was unfairly mistreated by the monarchy and the British press. Others will always believe she exploited royal status while portraying herself as perpetually victimized despite immense privilege. Some people feel compassion, others feel frustration, many feel both simultaneously. And maybe that complexity is precisely why this story refuses to disappear, because unlike simple scandals, this controversy touches emotional, political, cultural, and psychological issues all at once. It reflects modern society's conflicted relationship with fame, privilege, victimhood, and power. and few public figures embody those tensions more visibly than Meghan Markle. One thing, however, is undeniable. The relationship between Harry, Meghan, and the royal family fundamentally changed public perceptions of monarchy forever. It exposed tensions that had long existed beneath palace walls. It modernized royal media battles in ways previous generations never experienced. And it transformed private family disputes into global cultural entertainment on an unprecedented scale. Whether history ultimately judges Meghan Markle sympathetically or critically remains impossible to know right now. Public reputations evolve over decades, not headlines, but at this moment in time, she remains one of the most controversial and polarizing public figures in the world, and the debate surrounding her shows absolutely no signs of ending anytime soon. So now we want to hear from you. Do you believe Meghan Markle has been unfairly criticized and targeted by the media and royal establishment? Or do you believe critics are justified in viewing her public behavior as entitled, inconsistent, and rooted in endless grievance despite extraordinary privilege? Let us know your thoughts down below, because this conversation is far from over, and respectful debate is what keeps discussions like these alive. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss future discussions covering royal controversies, celebrity culture, media narratives, and the stories behind the headlines. Thank you all for watching, thank you for supporting the channel, and thank you for spending your time with us today. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next episode.